There is a concept in some mystical strains of Judaism known as the Mete Yafeh, as the beautiful death. Now, what this idea is that within these certain mystical traditions, there is this thought, there is this process of being able to be so embedded in prayer, to be so embedded in the mysticism of Judaism and whatever that might mean, either in the study of Torah, in a different type of tefillah, that you transcend life, and there's no other possibility but for God to kiss you and you die. Our rabbis say that there are a few people in Jewish history that this has happened to. So Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is said to have received the kiss of death. Miriam and Aaron are both have said to receive the kiss of death. And some of the great Hasidic masters and some of the great Kabbalists were known to receive the kiss of death. Fast forward 2,000 years from this point of this theology of being able to go into ourselves so spiritually and transcend ourselves so spiritually that there's nothing else for us to do but die. 2,000 years later, we have a different kind of concept that comes about in America, which is an idea that is the exact antithesis of this idea, which is so much are we dwelling in the world that we start to belong to this idea of capitalism, of greed, of making money at anyone's cost. It doesn't matter who stands in your way. This is a theory that this is a movement that we call the 80s, which stands in direct contrast to what we were talking about as far as this mysticism and the spiritual transcendence that happens 2,000 years before. And so what do these two methods, these two modes of living have in common? They're so different from one another, but at the same time they have one link that's very powerful. And that link is that according to Judaism, according to Jewish life, they're both way off track because they involve the self, because they are isolationist, and because they reject the concept of community. If we think about it, it's probably easier to think about this in the way of the monetary sense of saying, if we base what our worth is on how much money we make or how many things we have, how expensive our things are, and if anyone who's standing in our way is seen at best as an obstacle, but at worst as an enemy, as a competitor, as someone who is getting in our way, then that by definition is someone who is an isolationalist. The people standing in my way are people getting in my way. I'm out for myself. I'm trying to accumulate as much wealth, as much things as I can. But the other method is a little bit different. And if we think about it, it has the same outcome. That I'm going to sit here and I'm going to study Torah and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to pray and I'm going to go so deep into myself that there's no place for me to go but into communion with God. It has the exact same outcome. And that outcome is a rejection, once again, of community. It's a rejection of what it stands for to be Jewish, which is to be part of a family. Whether that be a small family, whether it be a synagogue family, whether it be Am Yisrael as a people in general. Both of these ways of life reject what it means to be Jewish. And of course, in Judaism, being a religion of paradoxes that we understand that both of them have some merit and both of them have something to teach the other. But it's finding that balance. That is the nuance of Judaism that we see over and over and over again. It is finding the balance that makes our lives meaningful. So we're going to study a little bit of Torah, but we're not going to go too deep into our spiritual selves lest we forget one another. But we're going to look at what our rabbis have to say about this idea of these balancing. So if you'll grab your Eitz Chaim in front of you, we are going to turn to page 471. And once you have turned to page 471, we are going to be chapter 23, verse 5. And I want my Hebrew speakers and my Hebrew readers to pay extra close attention because we're going to do a little bit of drashing in the Hebrew here. So we read in verse 5, Ki tirei hamor, so na'acha rovetz tachat, we turn the page, Masa'o v'chadalta me'ozev lo ozev, azov ta'azov imo. Translated into the English, when you see the donkey, the chamor, of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. So I'll read that one more time. When you see the donkey, the chamor, of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. Now our Hebrew speakers, chamor, the word for donkey, is also related to another word with the same shorish, the same root. If we switch the vowel around a little bit though, instead of saying chamor, we say homer. What does that translate to? Any Hebrew speakers? Material, right? So instead of chamor, the rabbis are telling us don't read this as chamor, which is probably where this animal gets its name. Chamor is an animal that has a material burden onto its back. So a beast of burden carries the weight of material. So instead of reading chamor, instead of read about the donkey under the weight, if we talk about us being under the weight of material, then we have a little bit different look at life. And the great Baal Shem Tov, the great founder of Hasidism, told us that we should read this passage in Mishpatim by saying that when we look at this enemy is a version of ourselves, where we often go either way in our lives, where we sometimes forget about God and we double down on the fact that we're trying to make money, we're trying to accumulate material, we're trying to accumulate wealth. And that is the material that burdens us. That is the material that pushes us down. But the Holy Baal Shem also says that we can do the exact same thing in the opposite capacity, where we reject the material world altogether and we're burdened, we're weighed down by a selfish mode of spirituality, where we're not looking at the people next to us and we're not seeing what we need to do to take care of ourselves, to take care of our families, and to take care of our communities. And so the Holy Baal Shem says we have to find a balance. We have to be able to see that that is an enemy. And the way that he says to do this is one of the most radical things in Judaism that is so easy in theory, but so incredibly difficult in practice. Where we go back to the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who asked this really fundamental question: where does God exist? Wherever we let God in. And why that becomes radical and why that becomes controversial is because when we talk about things that are taboo, things that we're not allowed to talk about in company, things that we're not supposed to be talking about on a Shabbat morning sermon, things that we're not supposed to be talking about on Shabbat, things like money, things like wealth, because it's not polite, you're not supposed to ask about people's money, those things get lost. And instead of opening a door to allow God to come in and be part of that conversation about where God's presence is when we are earning money and how we're spending our money, we say, don't talk about it. It's inappropriate. It's not polite. But we've gotten so conditioned to this idea of we're not supposed to talk about these things that we find just little hints about how we're supposed to be handling our money or how we're supposed to be handling the things in our lives, the materials in our lives, as revolutionary. I don't know if anyone has read this book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. It has become a revolution. Over 3 million copies of this book have been sold, and now there's a series on Netflix where this woman, Marie Kondo, who's Japanese, encourages everyone to go in through their house and pick up different possessions around their house and really to feel it. Pick it up and hold it. And if you have an emotional connection to it, if your heart feels warm, if you feel something good coming from it, then keep it. And if you don't, then it's time to donate it. And this is revolutionary. Millions of people, this has changed their lives to care about something. That is the revolution. That there are things that we have that we care about, and there are other things that we don't care about, and we shouldn't need those things. That's not a revolution. That's how we should be living every day. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And I know that I've been into this idea of challenging us to do these different challenges lately, but I'm going to do it again because I think there's something very important here. What the rabbis do, all the way from the Talmud and going on forward, is to say that we are supposed to have the door open always for God, no matter what that topic is. If it's politics, if it's sex, if it's money, all of those things that we're not supposed to talk about in public. The rabbis tell us this too is part of what it means to be Jewish. This is our Jewish lives. God is invited to every single part of it. So when we have money, and let me be very clear, the rabbis have no problem with people having money. Dafka the opposite. It's good to have parnasa. It's good to make money. It's good to be able to have that wealth. But what the rabbis stress is that we are not defined by how much money we make or how much material possessions we have, but if we walk with God throughout that process. It's about how we spend our money. It's about if we're picking up things and having emotional connections to them, or if we're bettering our community through our wealth and our materials. And if we're not, then we have to ask ourselves if the process from the beginning invited God in. So here's my challenge. We're going to do a little bit of a life-changing magic of tidying up. But we're going to do it a little bit differently. So what I'm going to invite you to do is after Shabbat, I want you to make a donation. It can be a donation to any charity of your choice. It can be a nickel or a dime in your pushka. But I want you, when you do it, instead of doing it because it's the right thing to do and because it's a good thing to do, I want us all to open the door to God and to close our eyes and to say a bracha. Just like we would if we were eating and being thankful for having the food and the sustenance of our lives, just as we would if we were in a moment of great joy or great simcha, I want to challenge us to be able to open the door and allow God to come in to that moment of our lives too. That giving charity, that doing something good is so holy and so Jewish that it deserves a bracha and it deserves our attention just the same way that prayer does. Because that's how we define ourselves. We don't define ourselves by how much we make. We define ourselves by what we do with it. And not only what we do with it, but how we let God into that act of chesed, of kindness, of giving, of tzedakah. So my bracha, so my prayer for all of us this Shabbat is that we think about those things that we're not supposed to talk about, whatever they might be, and we open the door. And especially on this Shabbat, when Shabbat ends, I want us to open that door wide. And when we give and when we make a donation, I want us to use that time to be mindful, to hold on to it, and to invite God in. Shabbat Shalom.